Harriet Flitcroft, Edss 599, AT3 Micro Teaching Portfolio Part 1. Okay everyone, so we're really going to be thinking about human development and human well-being in this lesson, okay? So drawing on what we've kind of spoken about before, how might we actually measure human well-being, okay? It's obviously quite important, but what is well-being? Does anybody want to have a go crack at that? Yeah, absolutely. So well-being, we're really thinking about health, mortality, GDP, the general overall state of different nations across the world. And how might we measure this? Anybody got any ideas? Yep, so things like GDP, that's gross domestic product, things like mortality at birth, thinking about the average age, we're thinking about life expectancy, level of exercise. There's quite a lot you can really think about. And well-being is really, really important to measure because it helps us have an indication of the level of development across the nation, across the globe. So really drawing on that to help us work out what countries need development, what are the gaps that we might see across the world, and really importantly, helping us reflect on our own state of well-being. So the task we're going to do today is compare and contrast. So we're going to use Gapminder. I'll just have you, I'll show you quickly what Gapminder is. But I want you to choose 3 ways of measuring well-being from the data available, 3 ways. And I want you to find data that reflects Australia. So not all of the data has numbers for Australia. So have a flick through, bit of an investigation here. And then I want you to choose a different country, any other country, okay? You've got to have the same data. So we're not looking at life expectancy in Australia versus average weight of children under 13 in a different country. So make sure you are comparing same sets of data. And I want you to put those into Excel. So we're going to draw on those ICT skills. Obviously, we've worked with the chart wizard before to make a pie chart and have a little summary of that data, okay? So what are the key issues you're drawing out? What are the key differences? Is there anything that's really surprised you? Is there anything that's kind of similar to Australia? And how does it help you reflect on the state of well-being in Australia? So this is Gapminder. I'm just going to bring this up. So there is a lot of data here. So really drawing through some of the key things. So what we might look at are things like child mortality, I've mentioned, life expectancy, but if you scroll down, you can see things on population and health. So injuries and accidents perhaps, and you can scroll up there, so maybe, how many people drown. Is this a really relevant way to measure well-being? Possibly, possibly not. You could reflect that in your summary. I'd really like to see some kind of evidence in your thinking. But this is kind of showing you how to gather the data that we need. So that's Gapminder. So play around with it, have a look, see what's most relevant. Don't forget to reflect that in your summary. Okay, we're just going to pop back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so that was Gapminder. So yeah, really just drawing on the most appropriate data that you think. Obviously you are comparing to Australia, and I want you to add your points into Excel to make that pie chart for us to explore. Okay, great. So that's the task. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, so Tristan's just asked, because there is different years, you can kind of track that along as the country develops. So what I would like you to do is do compare and contrast with Australia, just with those 3 data points, making sure you're reflecting the same years. What we will look at later is going to choose a country for us to go into further depth. So great question, absolutely. I think for this task, we're going to look at those static data years. Any other questions? Yep, okay, so Steve's just said if he can do a bar chart. Yes, okay, if you do find it easier to create a bar chart, or another kind of reflective, comparative data graph, then please do. If that's easier for you, pie chart just is kind of the kind of standard one we'll go to. But if you do find something that you think will reflect your understanding a little bit more, the sample work
I'll share is from a task from the NESO website. So the description of the activity: collecting demographic information from a variety of sources, including the internet, to complete a table of selected countries, global averages, and analyze research findings. Working in small groups to gather simple demographic characteristics of the selected countries and global averages. Groups could be assigned to each of the topics. Groups research and complete their part of the table. Teacher directs the collation of information with a projector. Students analyze finding and discuss oral reports and submit completed tables and analysis for marking. Just highlighting here the worksheet. So demographic research to be completed individually, looking at Australia across 100 years, other developed country, developed country, developing country, and at least developed countries, looking at some key ideas here, and the context here. So thinking about identifying, gathering, and evaluating statistical data through detailed examination of the human characteristics that make Australia unique. Okay, so I've got 3 examples. The first is a grade B. So here we can see a pretty well filled out table. We are missing ethnic composition here in this table. We scroll down to Australia has a small population compared to other countries in the world. Feedback for this is for Jessie. Demonstrated thorough knowledge and understanding of unique characteristics of Australian communities. High level of competence is evident, selection and organization of data for age structure and ethnic composition, but distribution has not been accurately recorded. Detailed comparisons have been made between Australia and other nations, and a number of differences have been identified, but there is little reference to specific figures. This reflects a B. I think this feedback is good. I do particularly like that they have mentioned there is little reference to specific figures. So there being the feedback is kind of relevant and helps the student understand, how they might strengthen this second bit. So the fact that they do have 3.69, but there's not any other figures there. So can they include growth rate? What's the high majority? So when we say high majority of Caucasian people, what does that mean? So the feedback is good. The feedback does say demonstrate thorough knowledge and understanding, which is reflected in the students' kind of grasp of the figures as well as the analysis. The second I have is for Shannon. So we'll look here. So this is her table followed by her analysis. So feedback for Shannon, and Shannon is a grade C. Shannon has demonstrated sound knowledge and understanding of characteristics of Australian communities. Adequate level of competence is evident in selection organization. Ethnic composition and age structure is well covered, but detail is lacking in some other categories. The distribution is being correctly interpreted, but no information provided for 1901. In written response, Shannon has referred to one major trend, the difference in life expectancy, but more detailed analysis. This reflects a C. So within this piece, I would probably explore in the feedback which categories they've struggled with. So it's obvious here that distribution is something they're struggling with. So perhaps, detailed ideas about distribution, how they might find the numbers, what distribution means. So really exploring that specific category. The fact that 1901 is also not filled in maybe suggests struggling a little bit with the source. So was there, perhaps indicate to the student how to use the sources a little bit more. As well as in the feedback, they did suggest further depth of analysis, but can we suggest to the student which specific analysis we might look at? So just giving an indication to the student of how to reach that higher level. And our final sample is Morgan. So very limited level of competence in identification, selection, organization. The data is often inaccurate, large proportion of the table not completed, elementary understanding of unique characteristics of Australia, very limited attempt to analyze and compare the data being made, a lack of understanding of the term distribution, and inaccuracy of the figures shown for growth rates limits the response. Okay, so we're looking at here again, really, not understanding some of this. So the fact that the feedback has been given to Morgan about understanding the concept of distribution, but not Shannon, I think could be kind of improved on. Definitely highlighting, so it is good feedback in the highlighting missing some of the categories, but maybe suggesting how they can improve this. So was it a speed? Is it something that maybe was it the fact that the student wasn't moving fast enough? And if so, do they need a higher level of scaffolding? Well, we see here elementary kind of suggestions there. There is a little bit, so also encouraging. So they have made a suggestion that Australia is more multicultural, and that there is a much smaller population. So it is that basic. So reinforce the student, you have the basic understanding, how can we build on this more? So that's kind of, tying on to limited level of competence, but there is that level of competence there. It might be limited, but it is there. So really trying to draw on what it is that is actually holding the student back with this task. Thank you. This task, so the description of activity here, a little confusing, I think, in the instructions related to the output of work. So maybe breaking down the task I would prefer. Thinking about this, so demographic research is to be completed individually, but there is discussions about small groups. So are groups getting together to explore demographics about Australia? So it's a little bit unclear. I think making it a little bit clearer. So complete this individually and we'll come together as a group and then we'll go the next step, because I think the steps are a little confusing. I think for some students to suggest some more sources. So we are using the CIA World Factbook, but obviously some students have struggled with that. So particularly the C and D grade, are there other sources they can maybe consume a little bit more? Okay, so obviously ICT capability is a very strong thing, so we do need students to be able to use websites, but is there maybe a simpler source that they can use? Is there a suggestion that the teacher could put forward? Students who struggle to find info, is there more scaffolding? So table is quite highly scaffolded in the first place, but is there a way maybe you can suggest how we can find that data? So obviously distribution was kind of difficult for two of our students. So what is distribution? Can we define this key concept here? Can we perhaps start to fill in, can we give, a 1-star level of difficulty here with a couple of figures filled in? Obviously, when catering for diverse learners, we don't want to give the higher achievers more work to do, but is there perhaps some scaffolding that we put in the table just to help our lower ability students? Defining key concepts is important. So perhaps relating to students what actually means when we say distribution. So what is that? And maybe how they might find and define developing and least developed countries. Differentiation of product. So the table obviously is quite prescriptive. Is there another way that students might be able to complete this? So is there perhaps maybe an Excel table they can use to create a graph? Can they do a changing line graph over time? Does it have to be specifically these numbers that we're looking at? So perhaps is there other ways that students can explore the changing nature of the human characteristics in Australia? So perhaps giving them a guiding research question. So how do figures illustrate the changing and unique human characteristics of Australia? And they can choose their product. So that helps students choose how they're going to show their learning. And also explain the impact and ideas behind the task. So there is some context given, but really maybe helping students understand why we look at distribution. What is the impact of distribution, particularly in Australia? Obviously, all the distribution of population is around the coast. Why do we think about that? Think about why we're talking about ethnic composition. How does this relate to Australia as a unique country, and why we do this analysis as well? So thinking about drawing on the different nature of the figures there.